Hello, I'm Andrew Harris here at the Indie Game Developer Network. I'm excited to be moderating this panel focused on using tabletop role-playing games as tools in a therapeutic practice. I'm joined by some of my friends and colleagues who are immersed in both the game design side of this, as well as using these games to foster growth, facilitate introspection, and build relationships and connections. Britton, can I have you start off, introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. I'm Britain, also known as Squidsy in the tabletop sphere. I am a mental health professional by day. I'm an LPC associate here in the state of Texas. I use therapeutic tabletop in both group and individual aspects. And then by night, I'm a game designer for Lost Guide Games. We make games focusing on found family and just really a lot of kind of inner self type stuff. It's a lot of fun. Lots of fun crying. But that's enough about me.
Awesome, thank you. Graham, could you please introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, you had me at fun crying. Hi, everybody. My name is Graham Gentz. I use he and they pronouns. I'm a facilitator and game designer and occasionally a puppet. My last big project was Under the Autumn Strangely, which is a pastoral horror game of anachronistic Americana in a land that never was. I focus on intentionality at the table as well as how those kinds of forms can teach games and can teach communication. I've been deeply passionate about mental health and the crossover between design and how those communications happen for any time I've been in the community. Taking that step from playing games with your friends to, oh my gosh, like you can go to cons big and small, and there will be people sharing the same kind of values that you do. And so as a result, I have found myself more and more in spaces that the people are deeply passionate about what they do. It's not just incidental that play at the table can happen because of the way that people want it to and can make choices about that in a broader sense. So as a result, I'm talking about these things all the time and I've met some really fabulous people. Um, I'll kick it to Grant to introduce himself.
Perfect.
Oh,
Grant, can you please introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and just tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
yeah, absolutely. Hello, my name is Grant Sparks. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. I practice out of Atlanta. I am also a certified geek therapist and a professional dungeon master. Um, I focus primarily on using TTRPGs broadly with adults to process trauma, do exposure therapy, a lot of narrative style therapies, and it makes up a pretty large chunk of my practice. I work primarily within the LGBTQ geek community in and around the Atlanta area. So there's understandably a lot of trauma and exposure therapy for us to work through. We utilize uh, broad spectrum of systems. One of my favorite things to do is go pluck out all of the indie games that I find at whatever con I'm going. I'm like, oh, I can use this for anxiety, and oh, I can use that for depression. So, um, a large spectrum of games that I use in my day to day.
Awesome. Thank you, Grant. I guess that makes it my turn. I'm Andrew Harris. I use both he and they pronouns. I'm really geeky and nerdy about all this stuff. I'm really excited to moderate this panel today. I'm I sort of straddle the educational side and the therapeutic side. My background is primarily in education, but I've been working a lot with neurodiverse young adults, teens, often autistic, up here in the New England area. I've been using this kind of intervention for about 15 years, and started working on my own tabletop role playing game called Guild Chronicles about 10 years ago. My goal was to kind of make something that I thought was better equipped to uh, produce collaborative and creative play. It's a very crunchy system, so it's not for every kind of intervention, but it's a lot of fun and definitely my passion project for about a decade at this point. All right, so that I guess obligatory introductions are complete. So let's move on and get into our discussion. Um, my goal is to structure this conversation to go a little bit deeper into some interesting topics that I think that this group is particularly well suited to talk about. If you're new to this idea of using tabletop role playing games as a therapeutic tool, There are lots and lots of great resources out there. We'll try to put some links to them later for you guys. There's definitely a lot to find. So we're going to zoom in and focus on some stuff that I think this group is really, really good for. So let's get into it. I think I want to start with sort of the big picture, and I think that hearing from each of you about this question will really give the viewers a chance to kind of understand you a little bit more and kind of frame what comes next. So we are all here talking about tabletop role-playing games and therapy. There's tons of modalities that you could be utilizing in therapy, but you guys have all chosen to use TTRPGs. So I was hoping each of you could kind of talk about what drew you to that, why this is sort of like your passion, and we can kind of take it from there. And there's no order; it's chaos.
Oh man, then I'm perfect for it.
Good.
Yeah, so I've always been an imaginative kid and pretend it was the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And I was writing stories at a young age. My family's first home computer, which is a thing that doesn't exist anymore, was one where we figured out how to make books by going to the local library and taking a class and then printing out pages and doing bookbinding. So I was doing some of that. And while I was interested in video games, the idea of telling stories and doing that kind of involvement became really fascinating to me. There's this thing where people, used to play D&D or something like, oh, I stopped a long time ago. I never, ever, ever stopped. So when I was like 10 years old, I was obsessively like running games for my friends and going to school and teaching things. And almost immediately left D20 and started looking for other systems and then experimenting with other things all throughout middle school, high school, college, into now. And at some point found game design and game design people who wanted to make their own things. So it was about discovery and it was about sharing. And I think because of the sheer amount of people I was playing with over the years, what I encountered was this alchemy, this kind of like perfect, unexplainable little jump that would occur where people were suddenly so emotionally invested in what was happening. I talk about stories very broadly in the way that why do people love stories? And I think fundamentally it's about characters. Why do you watch a TV show seasons and seasons after like it's quote unquote not good anymore? It's because people are empathy machines and they love the characters. So as a result, the difference between having a passive media like a play, a movie, and role-playing games is it obliterates the line between participant and audience member. And so as a result, I kept seeing over and over and over again how people were so deeply connected to what was happening and were so grateful and so happy. You were making micro communities constantly. And so that drove my passion and my interest in discovery and still does today.
Awesome. I think that resonates a lot with me. I see a lot of nodding from the panel too. The power of narrative and then the experience, having gone through an adventure with a group of people, you're bonded in really unique ways that I think is really, really cool. And people that haven't done it don't necessarily understand it as the intensity of the experience that it can be. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. So whenever this question comes up, I think of a very specific moment in my life, right? I was a bachelor of psychology. I was like on a halfway through my degree and just kind of not sure what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to be a counselor, but I didn't know what direction I wanted to take it. And I was at my weekly D&D session, and I watched one of the players over the course of that semester go through such a transformative arc in their life. They lost both their parents while we were playing. They were displaced from their house. Like they ended up in this really awful space. And watching them channel their D&D character in those moments where things would get really intense and use the game as a space to express feelings that they didn't have words for, and to go through the process of like, I want to go through a character arc where my player or my character like deals with their parent trauma, and then go through that, and like I want to think about loss. I want to do all of these things that I cannot articulate when we're just sitting around talking to each other. But my character, this paladin that go out and conquer these things, can do that. And just kind of watching this person who I knew intimately, I've known for 20 years, and I was like, wow, I've never seen you do that kind of work before. And if you can do that, this can work for anybody. And that really kind of fueled that direction for me of focusing on fantasy and narrative and the impact that leaning into those concepts can have for people and their sense of internal well-being and growth.
Awesome.
See, I got my start in tabletop actually very late. I don't I played Pathfinder a couple of times as a high schooler, but for the most part, my drive into tabletop started well into adulthood. Where I started, storytelling wise, was middle school. My best friend and I passed a notebook back and forth. We were writing a story together, and we were passing a notebook back and forth between the hallways. And then that evolved into me getting onto forum-based role plays. I met one of my very best friends through that. We did. We did a One Piece forum-based role play.
Yeah.
Not geeky at all. You're good. You're
No,
in a
not
safe
at all.
space. You can admit these things.
And so I got started into the forum-based role plays, which then evolved, of course, into Discord and stuff. But after it evolved into Discord, that's when I got my start into tabletop. And I actually didn't start as a player. I started as a GM, um, kind of helping people facilitate that storytelling on their own. Um, I'm really bad at Dungeons and Dragons. It's not my thing because I don't do the math. I just say let's all just tell a story. Maybe we'll roll some dice and see what happens. But yeah, that's where I got my start. And so whenever I saw the training for the Therapeutic Game Master right at the end of my graduate school program, I was so excited. I was like, "Are you meaning that I can like use this narrative therapy that I've built through the years in my head and put it like on a tabletop? I can do that?"
I love it. I love it. I love it. I think for me, like I said, I kind of came at this from an educational side. So I after I finished my undergrad, I was working in schools, um, and I kept seeing kids that reminded me of myself when I was little. School was not a good fit for me. I struggled a lot with sort of conventional education, um, and now I found myself in a position that I could maybe do something about it. And the first kid that I was working closely with just really didn't want anything to do with school, but was just so interested in fantasy. Wanted to play D&D. He was like 9 years old, hadn't figured it out, didn't have a group to play with, and I just found that I could connect with him around it, and it was just so easy to leverage that interest into anything. And it turned out that the work that I really enjoyed doing most was trying to develop confidence, esteem, social skills, like that ability to kind of interact and navigate the world. And I just found RPGs were such a good way to do that. It's a very, very collaborative social game. It requires a lot of communication. Um, and then I was like, maybe I can trick the world into letting me do this for a job. I should, that would be enjoyable. And it turns out there's a lot of other people interested in this. So it's really, that was sort of my entry point, and it's just been all good since then. All right, so zooming a little further in, once you've decided on the modality that you want to work in for therapy, or this modality in particular, there's still lots of decision points. I wish we could talk about all of them, but like the number of people that are going to be in the group, the kinds of goals you're going to work on, how you'll match the people in the group, all these different things. But I want to focus on one, because we're a bunch of game designers. I want to focus on one variable that I think sometimes gets overlooked, and we've already started to allude to. So I think we'll have good thoughts here. But how do you choose the right game? So you've got the group of people in front of you. How do you choose the game that's going to be the right game for them? I can ask more specific questions, or if anyone wants to sort of wax philosophical, we can let you jump in.
Ooh, chaos, waxing philosophical. You've got all of it, Andrew.
It's a Graham.
Like Britt, I am drawn to games that are highly collaborative and story based. I think that a long time ago, I realized that GM-less games were teaching something about how to play that GM'd games, quote unquote, were not.
Yeah.
like you, Andrew, I've done a lot of work with young people of education background in non-traditional settings. So when I was in kind of programming for kids, kind of embedded in schools but not part of the school, I was trying to bring in nerdy stuff. And then in when I had jobs that were more nerdy, I was trying to bring in more educational stuff. So I was kind of when I was working at board game cafes, I was like, how do we get families and kids involved, and how do we do more of these things? And so as a result, there was like this constant cross pollination of like what I wanted and what I thought was important about these spaces. And so as a result, when I would sit down with a bunch of kids with a stack of D&D books, I became more and more disillusioned with the fact that the game didn't actually teach itself. It didn't have any values. It didn't have, and I mean largely in like behavior and what the game was exactly. Is it numbers and stats? And is it a storytelling game? Is it a miniatures war game? Is it neither? Is it both? But in a GMless game, because it by definition has this different structure, it has to teach itself what is the activity, what is the collaboration, what is the yes anding for lack of a better overused term. And when people would ask questions, how do I get better at GMing? I would say play GMless games. They were the ones that like really opened up my mind. Fiasco was a watershed moment for me. People have reacted really strongly to For the Queen because there's no character sheet, and you have to sort of build your character 2 or 3 cards in, which I adore because prep is death, and I love the idea of listening to people. If you have a dungeon and you've written it down and you're subjecting people to a story, they're not empty vessels. And therefore, you're not listening to people at the table, and so that's why I like hate GM screens and like all these other things. So to wrap back around directly to your question, usually it's like whatever interesting game that I'm interested in, because I'm always looking for what is the new tech, what is the new idea, what is the thing that really suggests people. And I've played so many different games with so many different groups over the time. I know what I think makes a good game, but I'm really deeply interested in what other people are attempting to, what other people are experimenting with. So if there's a novel mechanic or it's something that's interesting or experimental, I am deeply drawn to games like that and then want to experience them with people so I can learn more about this weird thing.
Yeah, we make a game called Death to the GM. Basically,
Woo!
just
Woo!
I
Let's go!
I love GMless games. I whenever I approach what is a good fit for the table, it's always an understanding that these individuals either have only played D&D or they've never played a tabletop in their life. So I do try to pick ones that are that do have a role that's a little bit more that I can help kind of facilitate forward. Unfortunately, that does mean GM'd games, but I do take a step back. I am very big on, okay, this is their game, not mine. I'm just here to just describe a couple of things here and there, give them some NPCs to play with, but for the most part, this is their game. When it comes to choosing what game, I look at not only their interests, but I think it's important that we look at our interests as well. For example, I'm not a sci-fi person. Sci-fi is not my jam. I don't know a lot about it. I know pew pew laser guns and spaceships. That's it. So I'm not going to choose a game that is very sci-fi heavy simply because it's going to be a disappointment to the people who are very sci-fi oriented individuals. So that's really how I go about not only just choosing my game, but choosing one that I'd be interested in helping facilitate, as well as ones that they're interested in too. When it comes down to group goals, I think the simpler the mechanics, the easier it is to put in group goals. Like Graham was saying about, like Graham was saying about, a game that teaches itself, a game that lends itself to being very simple in that way. If I've got a crunchier game, then everybody's going to be focused on that crunch.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be focused on those stats, that power plays, that min-maxing, those dice rolls, rather than the goals in the story we're telling to help meet those goals.
I want to hop in because I think it's a natural point. I'm going to hop in with the defensive crunchy games because I think you guys have already alluded to like it being really important that it's something that you're interested in and passionate about. And I was crunching numbers. I loved that stuff when I was a kid. I would digest every book that came out and try to find that combo that let me go infinite. That's just my brain eats that up.
Hmm.
And it's not for everybody, which is 100% the case. But um, I think your point too, playing a really crunchy game, which is the modality that I like the most. I agree. It limits the number of things that you can really work in for goals without a lot of friction. So we're doing a lot of collaborative like we're working together on a team. I'm putting really difficult battles in there, and I'm making you work together and really push yourselves to the limit and communicate about that. It does stuff like that really, really well. And I think it also, the enjoyment of sitting around the table and reading the book and doing that power gaming together, I think there's something really interesting there too. You can still work in the narratives, but a system like that, sometimes there is friction because people want to get back to the battle and things like that. So I think it comes with pros and cons. I think the narrative being present and the narrative being about growth and learning is absolutely integral to it. But I do think crunchy systems for me, and mostly the kind of folks that I end up working with, are drawn to that. And then we kind of have that shared obsessive interest that we can bond around. Yeah, in defense of crunchy games.
Honestly, that's a skill.
I think it's a good point. I think a lot of these discussions come down into like crunch good, crunch bad.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think what I really liked about what you said, Andrew, is the idea for me as both a player of these games and a designer of these games, which are these separate things. The game should be teaching itself what the priorities are of
Yeah.
that game. So for me, the difficulty is not, oh, this is a crunchy game and therefore bad. Is it a crunchy game that wants to be a crunchy game, or is it a
Right.
crunchy game that thinks this is how games are done and therefore is unintentional with its design, which again goes to like my whole philosophy. So, well said, I think.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because it's definitely isn't a crunch good, crunch bad. It's a again, play what you like and play what you
Yeah.
know. I am really bad at math. I'm not a math person. I'm not. That's not my jam. So like I said, it's a skill that you can take a crunchy game and make it work. At least to me, because I'm going, oh, that's phenomenal. There's no way.
I think the same can be said for GM games versus GMless games. Like I don't ever play GMless games with my clients, like in therapy groups, because of the other modalities of therapy that I practice. So I lean very strongly into like the crusty old white man therapy, but make it really gay. Uh, like let's talk about your parents, but like how they messed you up, not whether or not you want to sleep with your mom, Freud. Like those types of things. Uh, but that lends itself very strongly to holding a like space of projection, which you need a game master to project on. If you're projecting in a villain or a theme or this integral topic that is focused in deconstructing trauma or um, holding experiences of violence or experiences of oppression, like those things are systems, and something or someone, mostly me and my sassiness in game, represents that system, right? So the number of times that I have had clients in a group that have needed that push of like, cool, y'all have been standing around like having a discussion about what's going to happen in this game. We're going to play the game. Like, you need the push, and then sometimes the people need that. And I think there is a space for that, especially in the style of therapy kind of based in that power dynamic exchange to hold that GM space and be that person, because then at the end of the day the group's like, cool, that's the guy, like that's the BBEG, that is
Yeah.
the person we are working towards or against or whatever. And it, in the same way that I think GMless games foster collaboration, that also does in its own way.
Awesome. Awesome. Super, super interesting. I really like we're coming at it from different perspectives, which I think is really good. But I think there's commonality and there's intentionality behind all of it, and I think there's lots of good ways to do it. I guess is a lovely message to be sending. This next topic, I think similarly. Whenever I think about TTRPGs as a tool for therapy, I really think back to the power of having a character that you get to inhabit in the world. So you can come up with a backstory. You've got these different capabilities. It might be a mirror of yourself. It might be a window into some sort of new experience or something that you're exploring. Um, but not everyone's going to approach it that way, right? Some people are just going to be like, I hit things hard and harder. And I think building characters with intentionality is definitely it can really elevate the experience of doing these things. So I guess I kind of want to talk a little bit about both the how having a character to explore things through is useful, and how you can sort of encourage people at your table to intentionally take some steps towards therapeutic goals doing that.
So I don't know. I think there's some value in like people who want to create characters that are, I just want to hit things and ask questions later. Especially teenagers.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
work I work with teenagers. I don't work with littles, but my older teens, it's very much I just want to create something that, like, I don't want to think about anything. But I think that there's merit in that as well, in the
Yeah.
fact that you give them things. Like, okay, you want to hit things first and ask questions later, that's great, but you know what you can't hit? This really difficult conversation. You know what you can't punch first? This puzzle that's really going to frustrate you. And really throwing those things at them and giving them little battles to really just
Yeah.
sweeten the pot a little bit, but giving them something that's going to circumvent that type of character. And I think that allows for a character growth and development that then they will see in themselves.
I like that a lot. You're basically saying, come with what you've got, and then I'm going to throw some new things in your path that's going to ask you to think about it in new ways and challenge. I think that's a great way of approaching it.
From the standpoint of a therapist too, it's very fun to watch the first time they try to hit the difficult conversation or the puzzle, and you're like, oh, you did just swing on the prince of this land because
Yep.
they said something you didn't like. Uh-oh. like, even in that, it lends teachability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being open to having that space of like, yeah, you want someone who doesn't think about what's going on and just responds on instinct. Great. And this is how that plays out a lot of the time if you don't learn the skills you need to hold a little pause, to maybe not think a whole lot, but think a little bit,
Yep.
just a little bit, which is fun. That's a very fun process to develop with people.
There's so many good pauses. There's so many different colors of pause and styles, whether or not it's therapeutic or otherwise. If it's with kids or various ages, like I have played with littles, and then every possible stage in between, all the way up to high school and beyond. And when I've been in programming for kids that was specifically nerdy, okay, we're going to play a bunch of role playing with kids. Or I've been at cons in big groups where there's people waiting in line to go play a new game, and then people are like, "Oh no, there's a family here. What do we do?" And I'm like, "It's okay. I'll give me any amount of people at any age, and I'll be perfectly happy to do this." The stereotype is this kid reacting, being like, okay, you're in a forest, what do you do? And the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm going to burn the forest down, right? Like that's a thing. And in fact, I've had, so-called managers explain, okay, if you're going to be running with kids, you got to be prepared that they're going to do these things, and you gotta tell them no. And I'm like, well, what if instead of no, I just pause the game and then ask them a series of questions? Really, there's really no reason why you have to adhere to anything. And eventually it can be like, well, why do you want to do that? Does your character want to do that? Is that different from why you want to do that? What do you think's going to happen if you do that? And already I feel like I'm a therapist because you're asking a series of questions. But we're not. There's not the idea of we're here to talk about this stuff, but it comes naturally because all I'm doing is developing a relationship and then asking them about their character and what it reveals. And so this is why when I sit down in groups of therapists who are like, we love role-playing games, there's so much to talk about.
that's 100% one of the reasons that it's so good. There's never like what are we going to do today? People will bring things to it. The action, the dice will cause the chaos that you need when there's a lull. These are all real benefits. When I'm thinking about characters and like that idea that your character can be working on something, and it can kind of be you working on it kind of a little bit more subtly. I think that's really appealing to especially teenagers. Working with teenagers, they don't want to talk much about their feelings in a direct way the first couple times you meet them. But you can ask them to explore their characters and do some really interesting things. I've had some people in my groups over and over again, year after year, and go from just wanting to blow everything up. I just want to cast fireballs every day. And then a few years later, I want to be the protector of the group. I want to put myself in danger. I'm the strong one, and that means I have a responsibility. Or the next year, I want to be the healer. I want to protect the person that's trying to protect us. And those, even just that, like shifting of what your role is in a group, I think is really interesting and exciting. Um, and I think sometimes that there's like some positive bleed, like your character is kind of you're affecting your own thinking a little bit in a really positive way. I was wondering, does anyone want to talk about bleed and transference? Try to like define those terms for people, and then what happens in this because of that. I'm putting the pop
Transference
quiz.
is
Transference.
yeah, it's my favorite thing because it's what I do therapeutically. So in social situations, period, but specifically for games and therapy, transference is the process of kind of someone projecting onto a thing uh, their experience. So for me as therapist and dungeon master, a lot of times I end up in a paternal role or I end up in a authority role for my client, right? And so that's one of the reasons that I tend to prefer a GM game because that facilitates that transference piece, which goes kind of hand in hand with the concept of bleed, which kind of the interplay between the player and the character. So you end up with this lovely triangle of like a person who has some blank slate on them with the therapist, the dungeon master, even if it's just the facilitating guiding role. Um, and the player who is projecting, right? They are putting concepts of their own experience, their own internal worlds onto that slate, but also onto their character. And you end up with this like lovely triangle to work with when it comes to storytelling and growth. That is the thing that facilitates that. I came in and all I wanted to do was hit things, and as I hit things over and over again in the environment and my character shifted, I stopped wanting to hit things all the time and
Yeah.
started thinking about, well, what if I did it this way? What if I thought about the puzzle before I tried to smash my way through it? So yeah, that's my bread and butter. I love it.
You're saying it so much like with so much more knowledge. Like I feel like you just got more chops in this area than me, and hearing you talk about it is so cool. And it makes me think about how I can be leveraging that more. I think it's really cool to hear you. I love I love transference. That's the quote. That's fantastic.
And one of the things that I tell anybody that I work with is like if after a couple of weeks working together, you're not like cussing me out or mad at me, I'm not doing my job effectively because you're not transferring what you need to be transferring onto me. And the same thing applies when I am running a game. It's like, cool, how do I embody the things that these characters came in to work on? If we're working on the perfect example, I have a group of people that I work with, all socially anxious, and they've worked together for a while, so they're comfortable. But outside of that group, incredible social anxiety. So we decided to play Alien. And I was just the xenomorph, and they were in a powered down space station, and that was it. And I gave them nothing other than the xenomorph is after you, and you have to deal with that and interact with each other. And that is like a perfect foil for them projecting all of that fear onto me, and then holding space for each other to process through it. It's really, it's so much fun.
Yeah, no, I completely going off of what Grant was saying, completely agree. If by if by a couple of months in you're not in here yelling, we've got a problem. Don't show me this mask of yeah everything's fine. Like let's get down to brass tacks. Um, I really like coming out with NPCs that really irritate my players. um, One very specific NPC comes to mind during a root game. We were playing root. It was to facilitate communication and boundary setting, voicing ideas, things like that. And facing difficult situations, as wartime suggests in the forest as much as you could be with fuzzy little creatures. But one NPC comes to mind. His name was Hermes. I stole his namesake from another character, but his name was Hermes, and he was this little like Despero looking mouse, just big ears, so cute. Built bombs. They were a bombardier type. But they built bombs. That was their whole jam, and just so go. Everything was so exciting. Everything was so exciting, and it really pushed one of my players' buttons. But that's kind of what we were doing, was that kind of patience testing and stuff like that. I want to see behind this curtain that you've got up right now, and it was great. I loved playing Hermes, because I loved irritating my players.
The idea of being the GM and being able to infuse this shared imagined world with whatever conflicts you want, with whatever challenges you want, I think it there's the potential for it becoming a terrible power trip, but if you handle it responsibly, it can provide those opportunities to really work on stuff that needs to be worked on in a fun way, in a safe place with people that you know and love, and sometimes cuss out. But yeah, that going back to it, I think that's another fun reason to be a GM. If you're trying to be able to like shift through these different challenges, you can provide some real opportunities to practice things kind of on the fly because you've got that weird power that everyone decides to grant you.
Yeah. Well, and he was Hermes was adopted and was taken on as a little mentee by the said player. So,
Fantastic. I think another thing that we've started to allude to a little bit is when you're using games this way in a therapeutic fashion, you're often wearing two hats. You're sort of facilitating the game and the action of it. So that might be, you're adjudicating dice rolls, you're role playing a hyperactive mouse that wants to build bombs. You're doing all of these different things at the same time. And then you also are sort of wearing this hat of I'm a therapist. I'm here for you to interact with. I'm here to challenge you. I'm here to question you. Um, so you're constantly having to kind of shift between these two things or blend these two things together. And I think it requires a lot of brain power, and I think that's why maybe for some people they aren't drawn to this modality, is because it really is very complex. That's why maybe we are drawn to it. Maybe that's just how our brains work. Um, but I'm wondering if people can talk a little bit about how they work their therapeutic techniques into games, and how facilitating as a storyteller at the same time, and when these two hats might be in harmony or in conflict with each other. It's a little vague.
no,
I think we can do it.
I really like that question though. Outside of narrative therapy, I am DBT informed. Um, and so I really enjoy emotional regulation. I really like working with emotional regulation. Um, like I tell my clients all the time when they get angry, anger is something I can understand. Anger is something I can get. Let's work on it. And so when it comes to the irritating little mouse, that was a lot of the emotional regulation piece. And I really like wearing both hats. I think wearing both hats has to be one of my favorite things. Because there are times that I set a scene, take a step back, and go, okay, this is yours. And I get to step out of that GM role and let them go and watch that therapist role for a little while, and go, okay, and now it's my turn, and step right back into it. I don't know. I think the shift is fun. Is it difficult? Is it tiring? It can be, but I think it's a lot of fun.
For sure. I definitely agree with all of that. One of the things that I find makes it so deeply impactful is like the hats complement each other
Mm-hmm.
more so than they conflict, right? There's a lot of power dynamic, there's a lot of suggestion, there's a lot of guidance in both roles. So looking at it from the perspective of like, am I wearing two hats or is this an outfit? Uh,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I approach it. Like when the way I structure my games is it's very defined. We are playing or we are not playing, and when we're playing, I'm leaned into the GM role 95%. The therapist is there, right? He's scanning, they're like looking around, making sure everyone is grounded or that no one is in crisis. But we are playing through an environment and themes and characters that we've designed. Like my session zeros in the therapeutic games last like several sessions. We spend a lot of time building characters and world building together so that I don't have to worry about micromanaging my clients when they're playing. They can just be my players. And then we take the time afterwards to be like, cool, let's break this down. What happened? Let's go back into therapy mode. Let's look at the themes we explored. Let's talk about the moments we had. And like sometimes you have to pause in the middle of game to do that. But I find a lot of times it complements itself. They complement each other rather so well that there's just a lot of fluidity.
Well, and I think it lends itself to being, when it comes to being a GM, like kind of like Graham was saying earlier, we're empathy machines at the end of the day. Um, and so I think it just comes with being a GM. If you see you've got a player in crisis, you're going to kind of stop game and go, okay, why don't we just take a break for a second? You know, not so much that therapeutic role of, hey, let's break it down, let's talk about it, let's do all these things, but kind of just that person, hey, whoa, is that right? Are you good? Are we okay? You know, as I like the outfit analogy because I think it really suits itself into that. We just take it an extra step further from, hey, why don't we take a snack break and take a breather for a second? You okay? You good? Into, hey, let's talk about what happened in that therapeutic sense.
I think this is exactly why I'm drawn to these discussions with these sorts of people, um, talking about these kinds of things, because um, when I'm talking about game theory, and I mean like in an emotional sense, not just like what are numbers and how do they affect people. When I introduce even like the smallest idea of, well, what is the power dynamic of the DM with players? Um, why do you have to have absolute control? How does that change the game otherwise? I get a lot of blank stares and a lot of, well, it's always been that way, and without any kind of like self-awareness of like what that means. Or if I'm asking about, okay, what's the difference between speaking in first person versus third person as a character? How does that affect the emotional resonance of what you're doing? And therefore, how does role playing affect the mechanical decision? And I get a lot of like scratched chins. But the moment I'm talking to therapists about how to use games, the different number of ways that they're broken down, the micro decisions, the two different hats as an outfit, we realize how complex and granular these decisions are emotionally and why the games are doing what they're doing and how they're pushing. And for me, this is the entire process. This is why the games exist and why they're interesting and why I continually am asking questions, because I want to know why these games are doing the things they do. Why do I enjoy them? It's because I adore trying to figure out why I care about this character or why I want to be this character or the catharsis that occurs because of the way it's done. And so it's changed the way that not only I run games, but I teach games and write games. So I want a game that has people empowered or making decisions or actively listening to people. Um, Eventually, at this point, in terms of safety tools becoming like much more common, it's the idea of we're LARPing and Bleed being drawn into the indie tabletop space and saying, oh, people are humans and they're important. And so the idea of the snack break being extended is, well, what are all of the infinitesimal steps that lead to the snack break, and why is that interesting and why is that important? It's not just the basic, I need to take care of my friend, but the result that what we're doing, this imagination game, is far more complex than we give it credit for. And the game itself and the activities that we take part in are really, really powerful. And that's even just like the starting point,
Yeah.
right? So I'm so excited that all these different things get to be talked about and discussed and why they're being chosen intentionally and how the games change intentionally. So I'm all about it.
I really like this. I feel like I also, Graham, that just the outfit comment was like opened up my mind to so many new ways of thinking about it. And I agree. This is having these conversations and finding like-minded people that are equally interested in this and do think about it in such detail. It's really exciting, and I think there's a lot to this process that's worth exploring and really really cool. So this is great. Okay, um, I'm being mindful of time. I'm trying to be mindful of time.
We have
The
like
next
40
question.
minutes. You're good.
Okay, we're all right. We're doing well. So
You want an hour and a half? Yeah, 40 minutes.
okay, cool.
2.5 hours, three.
This next question is related to the last one, I think. So to me, TTRPGs are fundamentally games that require a lot of communication with one another. So your need to build a shared understanding of the narrative that you're in, requiring quite a bit of communication, um, clarification, just a lot of language being used. Um, and you, even in the process of doing that, you have to make a lot of choices about what to focus on, what to omit, where to focus the player's attention. All of this is sort of helping to create that sort of shared experience in an imagined space. um, and then again, we layer therapeutic goals on top of all of this, and we're making more granular decisions. We're thinking more about the complexity of what are we communicating and how are we communicating it. So this might be themes that we're including in the narrative. That's potentially a therapeutic choice. How much detail we're going into describing a scary scene, that could be a therapeutic choice. The personality of the NPC that you're interacting with, potentially being purposefully triggering and exciting to work on. Um, so there's sort of all of these different things that relate to what we choose to communicate and how we choose to communicate, that I think we can think a lot about. Um, so I guess my question is, does the therapeutic lens change how you communicate in these sort of narrative spaces, and like how? Maybe is a good place to start the question.
I would say yes, absolutely. But not necessarily like in a bad way.
Yeah, yeah,
The change, I think, is that shift into something we've talked very strongly about, is that intentionality, right? Like the communication that I do, um, that is influenced by that therapeutic lens is very intentionally for the purpose of being therapeutic, right? I'm going to introduce a character that is obnoxious or annoying or frustrating if that's something that needs to be communicated, right? If there's a client that's trying to work through that, if there's a someone in the group that needs to be exposed to something like that, that I may not do if I was just doing a game at home.
Yep.
yeah.
uh, but that give and take of being the therapist versus being the game master, I think is also kind of super integral to that piece of how we are communicating those themes, how we're communicating the experience to the players. Um, one of the things that stands out to me is that like most of the time at home, I don't tell my players anything. They don't, like if I am designing a game, they get nothing. I'm like, these are the things you need to create your character. This is the environment. You don't know anything about the story I'm writing. You don't know, like, because that is the type of game that I like to run at home, where it's very thrilling. It's like, oh my god, this happened, and Game of Thrones and twists and plots and all of that. I don't do that in therapy because that's not helpful for most of my clients. They
Unpredictable.
exactly. Like there needs to be a back and forth. Like maybe we do need to start in the village of sentient mushrooms, and that's what they want to do, and that's not something I would think of, and they throw it out there, and we talk about the power differential. That influences that communication a whole lot.
Yeah, I really agree with Grant, and I think I love my GMs. I love my professional GMs to little bits and pieces. And so when I say this, it's with a lot of love. But I think that's what separates just a professional GM from a therapeutic GM. is that intentionality. Because yeah, I could walk into a game as a GM and not tell, in a casual game, and all my NPCs are going to be little bits and pieces of myself, and there's really not going to be a lot of intentionality behind it, other than as plot devices, because that's what they are. Um, whereas in a therapeutic game, how I interact with my players is not going to be so much, hey, this is me in NPC form. It's a, yes, I'm going to play what I know, I'm going to play how I know, but with the intention of, here is something that's going to challenge you. Here is, like I said, either whether it be a really annoying character or a really stubborn, headstrong character, or one that is a reflection of that player, there's an intention there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think another thing that I do sometimes when I'm kind of in that therapeutic or thinking about education and goals, um, I will sometimes preview for the group. I'm about to throw something at you with this goal in mind. So I was working with some fifth graders the other day. It was an early session, and I said, I'm going to challenge you guys to come to a consensus on what equipment to bring on this short adventure. But I think this is going to be hard because you're not going to be able to get everything you want. There's going to be a limited number of things. And I'm doing that to you because consensus building is hard. And I'm going to be helping you do consensus building during that time. So I'm going to be in the coach role, and I'll also be your storyteller for this period. And I think by framing things like that, it allows players to maybe learn a little bit more from it. They kind of realize what they're doing, and you can debrief it a little bit afterwards. So that idea of like preview and debrief being a way to kind of bookend those learning moments or those therapeutic moments. I would never include that in a home game with just my friends being silly and telling stories. But when I want to really focus someone's attention on something to get them to learn something, I might even just sort of step out of the game for a second and say, "Hey, this is here for a reason. Take it or leave it." But this is what I'm hoping will happen.
Well, and I think that's really important with, certain populations, especially if you're looking at one, the younger population, and then two,
Yep.
a very neurodivergent population. I do
Yeah.
think that preamble, if you will, to the game is really important. I've got, whenever I was working with my adult group, it was very much a, here's the story, here's the idea, but it's y'all's story and I'm gonna let y'all run with it. And there wasn't a whole lot of preamble. Um, but I do think with kids, especially when we look at the neurodivergent populations, that is very important, because they will try to collect everything possible and put it in a backpack that is relatively this small. Um, and they will want to make these decisions, and they do want to know why.
I spend a lot of time talking about keystone skills in terms of what it means to be in a space and what I think is an effective game or an interesting game or a collaborative game, and being able to make these choices and then adjust them as you go. That's the outfit. That's the 95.5. Like, what am I doing and why am I making the choices that I'm making? Um, and for me, the idea of communication breaks down into like a good half, if not more, of all these different decisions. You're noticing something, you're actively listening, and then how you choose to respond is so important. The before the game or before the big moment. I think there is so much value in saying, well, I'm going to challenge you. The idea of having a hierarchy as thin as possible is something that I have developed and continue to develop because allowing players, not just the GM, if you have a GM system, but the players to be able to modulate between these two things is so powerful. Okay, I'm asking you as a player. Okay, now we're focusing on character and how you can use those two things. And that's important before a session, these lengthy, many session zeros from Grant. Love that. And then how are we breaking down these decisions beforehand? Okay, I'm going to challenge you. In a home game, I think that's perfectly acceptable and interesting because then players come in with expectations and then they
Yeah.
can make choices based on that. And for me, the capstone of all of this is how vital the like debrief is, in which you leave the space and talk to people. Okay, what worked, what didn't, and these could be all kinds of goals. And it's sounding a little bit more like therapy as you go. But I found in college, after we would play 3 or 4 hours and then sit on the back stoop and then talk for 2 or 3 more hours until 4 in the morning, people said, you know what, I think I liked that the talk almost more than the game itself. And so as I realized, people were not just processing things, and so my drive for intentionality became more and more interested. And so at every level, you can make all of these different decisions, and why I think that's important. So it's a big deal, and being able to break it down interpersonally is the reality of what we're doing, and understanding that is key.
It's
I keep
really.
thinking. Oh
Go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead, Britt. Yeah.
I was
No,
just
you
gonna
go ahead.
say. No, you go ahead. I was just gonna say I think it's really interesting because when we get in these spaces and we talk about therapy and we talk about therapeutic approaches to things, it's very, very easy to go, well, we're just being people. Um, just a little bit more of a emotionally educated people. You know, like Graham was saying, sitting on the back stoop, even in a general game, or the discussion earlier about how, yeah, if we see people getting overwhelmed, if we see people go, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, it just is as GMs in general, even in a casual game. Oh, okay, hang on, well, why don't we take a break from what's just happened? That was a really big moment. Why don't we just go get some snacks, things like that, and talk about it as people. And so I think it's just a really interesting thing that I've noticed as we're talking about, is at the end of the day, it's just the thing that people do.
Yeah, I think that idea that some of these therapeutic things that we're making sound like they're unique to therapy, I think you're absolutely right. I think that they make all games better. Like when I started to like challenge myself and say I want to get more player input, I want to collaboratively tell this story more, I found the experience was better for everyone because of that. And I wasn't coming at it thinking, oh, I want to do this for therapeutic reasons. I was thinking, oh, you know what, when I'm a player and people ask me what I kind of want to see happen in the story and I give them some breadcrumbs for myself, that's fun. I enjoy that. So I think that that sort of like opening yourself up to all of these things in any gaming setting is really good. Um, yeah,
Well, I think there's a big reason why so much of the just like online discourse, often when it comes to like therapeutic gaming, is like gaming is only therapy if there's a therapist present, because it's so therapeutic just to play games, right? It is therapeutic. It's
yeah,
absolutely the experience of sitting down and Britt, like you said, just being human together is
yeah,
incredibly healing. And it's something that I think, especially the older we get, the harder it is to do, because it requires vulnerability. It requires the ability to communicate, to sit down and say, all right, this is what I want to do tonight. Like, I want to go play in the mystical forest, and I know that y'all want to go down to the mines, and I don't want to go down to the mines because that's scary to me. Like, it requires the ability to do those things. And whether you're doing it in your living room or in your therapist office, there's a reason that we all use it, right? It is just inherently good at this.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think whenever you were talking, a very specific moment came into my mind, and we weren't even playing a game. My best friend and I, and it was 3 a.m., which was our first mistake, but it was like 3 a.m., and we discovered Wanderhome. So we're going through Wanderhome for the very first time, creating characters as we go. Very best friends, so there was a lot of like no walls, vulnerabilities, fine, but it was so like, oh my god, it was so that just like, oh yeah, no, this is what it means, this is what this is just sitting down, being people and being vulnerable, and
yeah.
this in itself is healing. We're not even playing the game, we're just making characters because we're making characters with the safe word of the bees are very cute.
I feel like in previous jobs that I've had, I would I would be asked to try to squeeze therapeutic moments into other things. Like, oh, we've got a bunch of kids interested in video games. Try to make Minecraft like that, or they want to play Super Smash Brothers. Can you like make that into like one of these things? And you can try really hard and maybe bring up some of these topics. But I think you guys said it. TTRPGs are just ready for it. Like the experience itself is that, and it's fun, and it's just such a natural medium. If you're in it and you know this kind of game, it's just a little bit more intentionality can get you to these really really interesting points. I think I want to pivot to the fun part because we are talking about games fundamentally. Um,
It's
and
already fun, Andrew. We're having a blast.
oh no, this has been very fun. Sorry, I want to talk about games being fun, and that maybe being enough of a reason to do this in general. Whenever I tell people what I do for a living, and basically play games, I'm an adult that plays and makes games for a living. They're always like, "Wow, that must be so much fun," and it is. And I think the funness of it is, I think, one of the reasons that when I was working in schools, um, kids would just, I would build these relationships so quickly. I would have all of these, I don't know, it's just so easy to do so many things because we would just have fun together sometimes. Um, so I think sometimes there's like, you want to put a lot of therapy in. And I think some people might be worried that, oh, if you put in all these therapy themes, you're going to kill the fun. Or you might you might take it away from this thing that a game naturally should be. Can anyone talk about, even maybe it's like an anecdote to share, but like, how do you sort of make this tough stuff, potentially really tough stuff that gets brought up, into fun and into games, and kind of keep it from just becoming sad crying?
Not the fun kind of crying.
Not the fun crying.
I think, to me anyway, the key is that you don't, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't try to make the sad crying fun. I try to
Ah,
let it
cool.
be sad crying, and then we resolve it and we move forward. Like, you
And that's
know,
okay, right? We're playing a game, that's a thing, and then
right.
sometimes we're sad crying, and that's okay.
You know, I am in my at home. I am notorious for my Halloween games, and they used to be real scary, and now most of the time they just end up crying. And those are the games that are the most fun afterwards
Do the
because
same
they're
people come back to these games? It
yeah,
sounds
oh
like
yeah,
they do.
every year. It's like, oh, we're here again. Why are we doing this? But you know, those are the things I think that in when you look at it, you realize how much fun you're having because of how into it you are. And you know, at the end of the day, these things aren't they're not therapeutic first. They're human first, right? And
Mm.
all of that is based in, you know, how we engage each other around a table. And so from my perspective, we are there to role play characters, and that means the gamut of what this character can experience. That is the fun. The fun is being a different part of yourself. It is exploring a fantasy that you've never been able to do. It is stepping out of the comfort zone of the things you do every day, to have a different experience and retain a lot of that. And that can have positive and negative impact on you. I think people get into the crunch of trying to make things fun, and that makes it not fun. I was like, no, actually, no, let me feel things. Like, I'm here to feel things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is also breaking down the barriers of what therapy is. I feel like I can hear myself on somebody.
I think we got a little echo from you, Grant.
Is it okay? Um,
Echo
yeah. No, I don't hear it anymore. Um, I
anymore.
I think a lot of it is breaking down the barriers of what therapy is. I think a lot of people look at therapy and go, "Oh, all you're doing is you're sitting in a room talking about your trauma, crying all day, and that's all you do." And that's not true. That's not true. And I think the same could be said for therapeutic TTRPGs. You know, oh, it's going to be all crying, it's going to be all serious, it's going to be all trauma. That's not true. You're going to have shopping episodes. You're still going to have beach episodes. You're still going to have all these, a lot of just silly, silly moments as you would at any table. That's, again, going back to that human element, that's the human element. It's not always going to be serious and sad crying. It's going to be silly. You're going to walk out of the room maybe feeling like you didn't do a whole lot of work, but you're going to be walking out of that room laughing.
I think a lot of this crossover into your like indie experimental world in LARPs and LARP adjacent TTRPGs and storytelling RPGs that are like very light or deal with very intense or emotional topics, things of trauma, things of shared family. Uh, I My favorite con is Metatopia. It's in Morristown, New Jersey. And when I first went there, there was a place called the Crying Couch. It was a couch, and then it was designated the Crying Couch, and it was for people to go have their sad cries or their happy cries. And I think that at a certain point, broadly, it was discovered that bleed and immersion and transference was happening, and people didn't really know why. But I think that people were drawn to it, and I think the identification of vulnerability is so important. Um, in some miniatures war game setting, if you care about what's happening to your little figure, there's something transference happening, whether or not you're being asked to speak in first person or not. And in a storytelling game where you don't have goals, but your goal is not to accomplish something in a narrative sense, but it is to feel things, then that feels like the polar opposite. But I think that there's a lot happening at all of these levels. And so being able to talk about it therapeutically, talk about its value and its interest, and then why it's happening in the first place, I think is a really vital part of the process. And so when I'm trying to speak to kids, or if I'm just trying to create a an enjoyable experience and a collaborative experience, it's the my ideal table environment. It's one where people donate and are listened to and are able to make choices as both characters, and as players. And so the idea of the sad cry is on the table if it's what people are trying to create and trying to facilitate. And that's something that only happens through communication and through the intentionality of what mechanics are being used and how you're deciding to play your characters. So the purpose of these is embedded in a way that normally doesn't get talked about. And so as a result, I love connecting all of these things and saying that they're far more similar and therefore more powerful emotionally than we really give them credit for.
I like that a lot. I feel like a comment that I often get from parents is I've never had my kids say, "Oh, I really want to go to group tonight. I really want to go to social skills group tonight." And they're always so surprised. And then they're like, "But or what are you doing? Are you just playing? Like what's actually happening there? Why is my kid enjoying it?" And yeah, there can be really, really difficult stuff happening, but the game I often find myself like we might be doing something really hard, trying to maybe it's those fifth graders trying to like build a consensus about what stuff to bring on the adventure. It could take hours. It could be that difficult for them. But we've always got I always go back to, we all have the shared goal of going on this adventure, right, guys? We've got this. It's motivating us. We can't do it till we figure this out. And they will redouble their efforts over and over again because it's fun, because they have investment in it. It might not be fun to choose how many rations to bring, but they will get through that challenge with extra motivation. And it's liberating to hear you guys say it doesn't always have to be fun. I like that a lot. That's something I think we should be reminding ourselves of. That it can just be hard, and sometimes that is what you need, and then you can. Yeah, I like that a lot. Um,
I just want to throw something out there.
yeah,
It popped into my head. I think that a lot of times people confuse the concept of having fun and playing. Right? Playing
yeah.
doesn't always have to be fun. In fact, some of the greatest games I've ever played were very hard and pissed me off. Like, I don't know if you play like Soulsborne's games, but I do, and those aren't fun. I don't go to those and like, oh, I'm gonna have such a good time, but I'm still invested in the play, and that I think is the element that I've many a parent like, "Were you just playing with my kids?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but you have no idea what that actually means." Because we're playing through, like, I don't know, big stuff. We are imagining, we are engaging in spaces that, if you're just looking at it, may seem like we're just sitting around laughing, but when we're sitting around laughing as a kid who's never negotiated anything in their life before figures out how to compromise with someone else, like, that's a huge deal. And the draw to it is that, yes, the fun is there, and that's why they want to keep coming back. It's why it's effective. It's like, I don't know about y'all. I'm in therapy, and there are days where I'm like, I don't want to go there, and I really wish that it was more fun. Like, I, I wish it was fun, but that element is such an important piece to why this works.
Yeah, yeah. I think jumping off of that, how do you know it's working? I guess this is like a vague question, and you could maybe zoom in on like a kid or a group or in general, but what does success look like in this kind of therapy?
A pall drops over the room.
This this
Um,
this was not in my prepared questions. This is me ambushing my panel.
yeah, ambush me all the time. I so I'm not a therapist, but I've done a lot of different games with a lot of different groups, and I'm always drawn towards kids, and particularly neurodivergent stuff. Whenever I'm in a large program and there's kids that are labeled unfairly or bizarrely, I get very upset, and I say no. I will spend all the time needed. I'll do everything else. Like this is something that I've found that I'm interested in and good at. And so in terms of moving the needle, it's are you able to have conversations outside the game? Or I feel like the panelists have already come up with anecdotes in which there was a kind of change that occurred because of the kinds of characters they were making. And I love that. I love hearing that because it means that without being asked to do so, the people are challenging themselves. People are looking for change. They're looking for growth in a way that it's not being instigated
Yeah,
directly. Um, and I think everyone here knows the power of this, like kind of the transference and the one hand on the wheel, where it's opening it up, and then people are able to decide what they're going to put on the table, and it's kind of low pressure. That's why I love this. I burned down the forest example. People talk about it like it's a horror story, and not only is it role playing games all about communication, but they're about agency in a way that
yeah,
oftentimes people struggle with in their entire lives, especially if you're a young person, or especially if you have other social needs that occur. The idea of agency is so palpable. And so all of a sudden you've created an environment, a imagined collective hallucination where what do you do is the most important question. I'm going to set things. What do you do? Then you get to make decisions. And so it's not disruptive. I burn down the forest or I attack the shopkeeper or punch the prince is experimentation. It's being
yeah.
a scientist. It's exploration. And that's good. And all of these things are good. So very broadly, if I'm with a bunch of people over time, and they start making different kinds of decisions or different kinds of things, or out of the game, in my again the debrief, which I think is so vital. If people are working through things, and I just got to be like, that's very interesting. Then I feel like the game as an experience or as the shared collective table has benefited everyone and for the reasons in which are unclear and then defined as you go.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I use vaguely as a marker of success is whether or not people are talking to each other before and after session, and especially in a therapy group. Right in the very beginning, like the main topic of conversation for the first like 6 weeks in most of my groups is like me. They're like, oh yeah, what do you think? Blah blah blah. Grant, this is gonna happen. Grant's such a douchebag. Blah blah blah. Like they think that I'm like not muted and camera off on the other line. I'm just sitting there taking notes. But that changes right over time as rapport builds and people get comfortable with each other. And if the only marker for success is someone who wouldn't have shared something trivial about their life shares something trivial about their life, then it's a success. And I think that broadly spans to things like, cool, now someone who would never have talked about this thing, period, that happened to them when they were very young and they've never shared it with anyone, now they're sharing it in this group, or they're sharing it through this character, or this person who's so deeply in the closet and the only person that knows that they're trans is me. and now all of a sudden they are comfortable embodying the gender that they want to present as. Those markers, I think they move based on what you're doing and who you're doing it with. But at its core level, if change is happening, then there is success. Whether it's itty bitty little steps or it's huge leaps and bounds.
And I think looking at those small things is so important. I think sometimes as therapists we can really get caught up in, oh my god, am I really helping this person? Is this really working? Am I really actually doing something? And we actually have to look at those little changes. Um, are they actually talking? Rather than coming in and looking at me and it being crickets and going, okay, what are we gonna do today? Them busting down the door and going, you will not believe what has happened to me in these past 2 weeks, and telling everybody, just without prompting, without anything. Um, those little markers that are so easily missed.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think sometimes there is like a tension for me, like we have to be doing the big work. And then sometimes someone will come into a group and remind me, they'll just say, I just had a shitty day at work. Can we just have some escapism? Can we play? I just want to be a wizard. I just want to cast spells and stuff. And sometimes that is the goal, that there is this sort of, I've got a group of people that accepts me and understands me and shares my interest in this weird thing, and that just makes me feel good. And sometimes I get to have the 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 ability to go do. I get to shoot the dragon. I get to blow up the bar. Like that the idea that you have like this ability to act can be really amazing, especially after a really hard week. Um, I think another marker for me, I'll sometimes do this, and now it's time for something completely different. Games where we just pause whatever story we're in the middle of. Maybe someone's absent and we don't want to push the plot forward, and we'll either just like see what happens, and I just sort of let it be, and people will talk about their lives for a little bit. Hey, they see a game over on the corner. You guys want to try that game out tonight, or do you guys want to go get boba tea? That's sort of just like removal of all of the structure and support, and just seeing what happens. I think is a great way to kind of get a feel for, yeah, like who's grown, how have they grown, what kind of relationships have formed. Can feel really really cool to see that growth happen. And I think the cool thing is, and I've done a little bit of like early research on these interventions, but like the people playing them see them too. And I don't know if that's about highlighting the growth when I see it. Like I try to make a practice of sort of saying, I see this thing that you've done. I think that was hard. And I think maybe when I met you a couple of years ago, I would have been like surprised to see you do that. Now it doesn't surprise me. Maybe it's because I do that, but people see the growth. They say, we come out of something like, man, I had never really thought about my dad in that way before, but now that you said that, wow. Or it's usually pretty hard for me to stand up for myself, but it was great standing up for that kid in the story. Wow. And I think that those sort of moments, to hear them notice the growth, I think is really really cool. And I think that's when I'm more sure that we're not just sitting around and playing games, which clearly we're not. But I think sometimes I get that fear in my head that my job is playing games. Is that real?
Mm-hmm.
I get to get a little reassurance and things like that.
Yeah, and a moment popped into my head whenever it came to like measuring success and is this working or not. Um, I it's a, oh, well, I had this XYZ happen and I stopped and I thought for a moment, what would my character do? And I handled it like that. And I've been told that before as a therapist, and I
Yeah.
was like, okay, we're good. We're okay. We're not just sitting around playing silly games. We are actually doing things.
As somebody who takes games very, very seriously and does not use them in a therapeutic way, I adore all of this. And it's not to say that my games are not silly or that the silly things don't happen. But for me, the space is so important and powerful and huge. So the reason that I find things intentional and why I'm listening and why I'm constantly looking for more things is I don't find them frivolous. I find them
Yeah.
powerful and healing and interesting and revealing. And for all of these reasons, I'm in the place that I am. And try to adjust how I teach the games and the behaviors and the power that each individual person has. So um, uh, even if it's the most off the wall, bizarre, goofy story and characters and narrative, that never changes how I am. Again, the many things in my outfit, all the things that I'm thinking about. Why are these decisions being made? Is there a lack of reality? Are we jumping over the moon? Are we doing that? And that is just as grounded as we're like going through some kind of literal trench and talking about some like real topic. For me, they're all just like different shades and choices being made, and all of that is so powerful. So the silly games, please, everyone here, they're awesome, and they're awesome.
They are awesome.
I didn't say not to be like a therapist or anything for a minute, but
Yeah,
like,
do
I'm
it.
pretty sure that like no one in this group and no one that's listening to this has ever wondered whether or not they're doing real work. That's just something that someone else asked them, and then they stuck
Yep.
that question stuck somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know what? Actually, I've never questioned whether or not this was effective because I know it is because I've done it my whole life. It's the reason I'm alive. And I know that there are hundreds, if not thousands and millions of people that resonate with that concept.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think so often that are you just playing? Is this like is a judgment from someone else that doesn't know how to play?
Oh yeah.
I
Um,
like that. I
and
like
that's
that.
like just because it makes you uncomfortable does not mean it's not effective.
And
I
I
I do feel some pressure to prove it to people, and maybe if someone that's dysfunctional, like I want to be able to bill insurance, right? I want right there are like some things that are I don't know, but like yes, in my heart of hearts, absolutely
Yep.
no question. But yeah, the external validation stuff has other benefits.
Oh, 100%. I was telling Andrew kind of before this started. I sent a PowerPoint and I kind of changed it up a little bit, but I did baby's first presentation Thursday over actually this exact same topic to a bunch of different professionals in my local area who don't play tabletop. There were a few that were familiar. One of them uses it's not Crisis Core, that's Final Fantasy. I can't think of what it's called now, but it's almost like a watered down version of D&D. Um, and it was very intimidating. It is that external validation, 100%. That oh my god, these people are looking at me going, "You mean you play games and that's how you make your money in this profession that we're all professionals in? That's how you make your money?" Yes, yes, it is actually.
When I tell you the number of times I've talked to my boss about what I do in session, and the eye roll is so like I work several times. I work for an insurance company, and I don't even want to know. And it's just walk away. Like, yeah, and I think there is a huge systemic structure that pushes that idea that like we have to prove that this is more than just playing. But I think Graham made a hugely important point that play is actually incredibly serious, and it's
Yeah.
like it's a very integral part of like maintaining your happiness over the course of your life.
Hmm.
Like adults that forget how to play and let themselves go to that space end up being miserable.
Yep.
It's just it's a part of how we learn. It has always been a part of how we learn. It's a part of how we express ourselves. It always has been, and it will continue to be. And I really think that piece is it's definitely changing, which is awesome to see that like it's getting registered. But that external validation point, I think, is more and more important the bigger we get, and the more people that start doing this start to realize like, oh man, like actually maybe there's just a bunch of us that don't know how to play, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
A terrifying thought.
It is. It is. That's why I really like when I do my groups. If you don't have experience in tabletop, that's fine. Come on,
Oh
come
yeah.
sit with me.
Yep.
Um, Come experience a group with me because that is a big thing. Not
Yep.
adults who don't play. They're miserable, and they're miserable to be around. I'll be really honest. They're miserable to be around, and so sitting down and watching them all go, oh, and creating I don't know, uh, I'm thinking of a we played. It's a Caltrop core game. Terrors and Toys and Terrors. A Furby that shoots a laser beam out of their forehead, out of the little thing on their forehead to like get the big sea monster at the bottom of the lake. Like that was so much fun. Person who's never played tabletop before.
Yep.
This is what I'm talking about, the serious, silly thing. Like, I
Yeah.
take all of these games incredibly seriously. And that game where the Furby was like shooting the laser at the monster, I would take just as seriously as other parts, in the sense that like what is happening is has weight or is interesting, or the things that the player is deciding to do or exploring are powerful or needed. It's not. I'm never flippant with what's happening.
Yep.
Tone is so different from the action being taken. And the idea of maybe people don't know how to play games, I think, is a wonderful way to encompass the idea of how people are able to invest themselves, whether or not to be vulnerable, or how they make choices. So for me, for virtually any session, whether or not it's GM'd or GMless, the first like third or so is me getting people comfortable. It's getting falling into the space. It's inhabiting something or knowing what the nomenclature is. It's either asking open-ended questions, okay, what do you see in the room, and people being confused, or be asking that, okay, what is your character doing at this point? And so after that point, you can start introducing things. It's on the same lines as people complaining about like, oh, I made this dungeon and all my players wanted to do was like sell lemonade in a lemonade stand. And for me, that is the game. If you have a game where you're taking your graph paper and you're throwing it away, and the players are just screwing around, then you've missed the point. They have found the game and they found it without you.
Yep.
And so as a result, that's why all of these things are so important. Because you found a game where the players are going to be deeply invested in the economics of their lemonade stand, and that is the goal. The goal is having players care about what's happening, because then anything can happen. You can complicate it, you can suggest, you can add anything that you want, and that's why it's the silliest thing, quote unquote, is secretly, not so secretly, and not so silly at all.
A yes
I love
and
that.
yes but are my favorite things.
Sure.
You know, the yes and or yes but instead of the no.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The idea that you're in it with the players, that they are as much a part of the story as you, and all of the planning that you did or did not do. I think that's such an important takeaway. I'm still being mindful of time. This may actually be a very cool note to end on, because I think that was a profound idea, well articulated. I think we should try to wrap it up. I want to give everybody a little chance to kind of talk a little bit about what they do, if people want to find you on the socials, if people want to learn more about your games, any of these things that you want to share out with people. I want to just give everyone a chance to talk a little bit about that. Britton, can we start with you?
Sure. So if you want to find more of my tabletop type stuff, I have an itch.io Lost Guide Games over on itch.io. You can also follow me on Threads, Corrosive Squid, pretty much on all platforms. I also stream on Twitch, whether it be video games, tabletop. I'm always down to talk about stuff. We just got done with Neon Shadows last year. Development's been a little slow because I'm working on another game now. That is actually open for public beta playtest at the moment. Split Souls. It's being shared all over social media at the moment. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Tumblr's another big place to find me. Shockingly.
Yeah, you don't have a Tumblr vibe at all.
No, not at all, right? But yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's it for me for tabletop at least.
Awesome. Graham, can I come to you?
Yeah, so I have an itch, which is grahamgentz.itch.io. You can find games like Under the Autumn Strangely, Ooze Your Daddy, and Henry Kissinger, Immortal Lich. If you want physical copies of games, I'm at Indie Press Revolution and Drive Through RPG. Occasionally, I've been at social media things like Blue Sky, but because I have left Twitter forever and in general don't really engage with these spaces, and did because I was looking for people to talk design with and about to various degrees. Most places I'm This May Be Gran, but these days if you want to talk, I'm usually around Discord, and certainly Itch is where I'm always looking for people doing interesting things.
Excellent. Excellent. How about Grant? What are you up to these days?
Sure. So if the best way to reach me is actually through my practice email. So it's just gsparks@modernpath.net. I also dropped a nuke on my social media a few years ago and just not going back, unfortunately, because I was like, oh, cool, my community, bye bye. But that is a great way to reach me. Modernpath.net is just my practices site. And Discord, I am here, gsparks1247. Feel free to reach out if you would like to.
Excellent. And I've been, you can find most of my stuff. I always try to keep a link to everything that's going on guildchronicles.com. I am negligent of my social media. So I think, yeah, if you want to reach me, I think finding me on my website, on Discord, I'm at Guild Chronicles. I would love to connect. If you're excited about this kind of stuff, if anybody here seems like someone you'd like to collaborate with, I highly encourage you to reach out to folks. This is a great team, really creative and really passionate group of people. I want to thank everyone that's been here for listening and taking the time, letting us geek out about this for an hour and a half. This is something we clearly all care and think about a lot. I hope you found it informative. I hope that you would, if you haven't been using this sort of modality before and you're curious about it, I hope this kind of keeps your curiosity growing. I wanted to thank IGDN for hosting the summer series, especially Matthew Orr from Wet Ink Games, who has helped put this whole thing together. We would not have been able to pull this off without your support. And finally, thank you to our amazing panelists. You guys are passionate, geeky, wild. I love all of you, and it's been really, really fun to have this conversation today. So thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for facilitating the structure of this.
No, I appreciate that. All right. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks again for watching.
Bye.
Bye bye.